The maintenance log showed her aircraft grounded for the third consecutive week. Safety protocols, they said. Age requirements, they insisted. Sarah Chen stared at the red-stamped denial across her flight clearance, the ink still fresh from this morning's briefing. Around her, seasoned pilots suited up for the morning patrol, their conversations a blend of tactical updates and casual banter about weekend plans. None of them looked her way. At 19, she was the youngest pilot ever to complete advanced fighter training at Thunder Mesa, but that achievement felt hollow when her F-22 Raptor sat silent in the hangar, while enemy contacts multiplied along the border. The radar screen in the command center flickered with new signatures, more than yesterday, positioning themselves just outside the no-fly zone. Someone needed to respond. Someone with clearance. Someone old enough, according to the manual. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The desert wind carried the scent of sage and aviation fuel across Falcon Ridge Air Force Base as dawn broke over the Arizona mountains. Sarah walked the flight line with measured steps, her helmet bag slung over one shoulder, flight suit crisp. Despite the early hour, the orange sun painted the concrete in long shadows, and the distant hum of generators provided a steady backdrop to the morning's operations. She had been walking this same route for weeks now, a ritual that began before sunrise and ended when the day's missions launched without her. Thunder Flight was preparing for another border patrol, their F-35s lined up in perfect formation on the tarmac. Captain Jake Thompson emerged from the briefing room, his squadron patch catching the light as he gestured toward the tactical display visible through the open hangar doors. Behind him, Captain Tyler Brooks adjusted his helmet and laughed at something one of the newer pilots had said. They moved with the confidence of men who had never been told they were too young, too inexperienced, too much of a liability to trust with real missions. Sarah's boots echoed against the concrete as she passed the fuel depot where Sergeant Mike O'Connor was directing the morning refueling operations. He nodded in her direction, a brief acknowledgement that carried more respect than anything she received from the flight crews. O'Connor had been working these hangars for 15 years, and he understood aircraft better than most pilots understood themselves. His weathered hands guided fuel lines with the precision of a surgeon, and his eyes missed nothing when it came to the mechanical condition of the jets under his care. The command center buzzed with pre-dawn activity as communications officers monitored radio frequencies and radar operators tracked the night's accumulated intelligence. Major David Hayes stood near the central display, coffee in hand, studying the pattern of contacts that had been building along the eastern border for the past 72 hours. The enemy was testing their response times, probing for weaknesses in coverage, and establishing patterns that suggested something larger was developing. Hayes knew it, the squadron leaders knew it, and Sarah knew it too from the fragments of briefings she was allowed to observe. Lieutenant Commander Rebecca Walsh emerged from the intelligence section, carrying a stack of reconnaissance photos, her expression serious as she approached Hayes with the latest analysis. Walsh had been Sarah's primary instructor during advanced training, the one officer who consistently argued that age meant less than aptitude when it came to aerial combat. Her recommendations had gotten Sarah through the program, but they hadn't been enough to get her into active rotation. The politics of military aviation demanded experience measured in years, not just skill measured in simulation scores. Colonel Marcus Rivera's voice carried across the briefing area as he outlined the day's patrol sectors to Thunder Flight. His words were precise, clinical, focused on maintaining defensive postures while avoiding any actions that might escalate. The growing tension. Rivera commanded respect through decades of experience, his flight record filled with successful missions and commendations that stretched back to conflicts Sarah had only read about in history books. He was a careful commander, one who weighed every decision against potential consequences, and youth represented an unacceptable variable in his calculations. Sarah found herself standing near the edge of the briefing area, close enough to hear the tactical discussions, but far enough away to avoid drawing attention. The morning's intelligence painted a clear picture of increasing enemy activity, with formations growing larger and more aggressive in their approach to the border. Radar contacts showed coordinated movements, suggesting advanced scouting missions, the kind of probing operations that typically preceded larger incursions. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The pattern was textbook, something Sarah had studied extensively during her tactical training, but her insights remained unheard in rooms where her age spoke louder than her knowledge. The hangar that housed her F-22 felt cavernous in the early morning light, shadows stretching between the support beams, while dust motes danced in the streams of sunlight filtering through high windows. Lightning Strike sat in pristine condition, every system checked and rechecked by maintenance crews, who took pride in their work regardless of whether the aircraft would see combat. Sarah ran her hand along the smooth composite skin of the wing, feeling the subtle texture of the stealth coating that made the Raptor nearly invisible to enemy radar. This machine was built for air superiority, designed to dominate any threat in the sky, but it remained grounded by policies that prioritize bureaucratic safety over operational necessity. Her personal flight records filled a thick folder that she kept in her quarters, documentation of every simulation, every training exercise, every evaluation that had brought her to this point. The scores spoke for themselves, consistently placing her in the top percentile of pilots across all categories of aerial combat. Her reaction times, spatial awareness, and tactical decision-making had impressed every instructor who worked with her, but none of that mattered when regulations stated minimum age requirements for combat deployment. The manual was clear, and Colonel Rivera followed the manual without exception. The communications office maintained constant contact with border observation posts, their radios crackling with routine check-ins and status reports throughout the morning. Sarah often found herself lingering near their stations, listening to the coded transmissions that painted a picture of growing activity along the contested frontier. Observation posts reported increased vehicle movement, communication intercepts suggested coordinated planning, and aerial reconnaissance showed enemy formations conducting training exercises with unusual intensity. The intelligence pointed towards something significant developing, but the response remained constrained by standard protocols and command reluctance to escalate. Training flights offered Sarah her only opportunity to take Lightning Strike into the air, brief sorties that kept her skills sharp while reinforcing her exclusion from meaningful operations. She had memorized every canyon and ridge in the training area, could navigate the complex terrain at low altitude without reference to instruments, and had developed an intuitive understanding of how the desert thermals affected aircraft performance at different times of day. This knowledge remained theoretical in the context of real combat, untested against actual threats, but it represented the foundation of expertise that would prove crucial when circumstances finally demanded her participation. The Officers' Club served as an informal gathering place where pilots discussed missions, shared experiences, and reinforced the social hierarchies that governed squadron life. Sarah rarely entered the building, knowing that her presence would shift conversations toward awkward acknowledgments of her unique position within the unit. She was simultaneously the most qualified new pilot they had ever trained and the least trusted when it came to actual deployment. This contradiction created tensions that everyone preferred to avoid through the simple expedient of exclusion. Weather briefings took place each morning in a small conference room adjacent to the main briefing area, where meteorologists outlined conditions that would affect flight operations throughout the day. Sarah attended these sessions when permitted, absorbing information about wind patterns, visibility conditions, and atmospheric disturbances that could impact aerial combat. The desert environment presented unique challenges for fighter operations, with thermal columns that could disrupt weapon systems and dust storms that could appear with minimal warning. Understanding these conditions required experience that could only be gained through actual flight time in challenging circumstances. The armament section maintained responsibility for weapons loading and systems checks, ensuring that each aircraft carried the appropriate ordnance for its assigned mission. Sarah often observed their procedures from a distance, noting the careful handling of air-to-air missiles and the precise calibration of targeting systems. Thunder Flight typically carried standard defensive loadouts for border patrol missions, sufficient for deterrence but limited in scope compared to the comprehensive weapons packages that would be required for sustained air combat operations. The armament crews worked with professional efficiency, preparing for missions they hoped would remain routine while understanding that circumstances could change rapidly. Intelligence updates arrived throughout the day via secure communications channels providing continuous assessment of enemy capabilities and intentions. Sarah had developed relationships with several intelligence analysts who appreciated her tactical knowledge and theoretical understanding of air combat operations. These informal discussions gave her insights into enemy aircraft performance, pilot training methods, and operational doctrines that could prove valuable in actual combat situations. The intelligence picture showed a competent adversary with modern equipment and training that matched or exceeded their own in several categories. Simulation facilities provided the closest approximation to real combat that Sarah could access under current restrictions, and she spent countless hours refining her skills against computer-generated opponents. The simulators could replicate any known aircraft type and create scenarios based on actual intelligence about enemy capabilities. Sarah had flown against every potential threat aircraft in the database, studying their performance characteristics and developing tactical approaches for engaging them effectively. Her simulation scores remained consistently superior, but virtual victories carried no weight in the real-world decision-making process that governed combat assignments. The evening briefings summarized each day's activities and outlined plans for the following day's operations, sessions that Sarah attended when her schedule permitted. These meetings revealed the growing frustration among squadron leadership as enemy activity continued to increase while their response options remained limited by higher command directives. The rules of engagement required positive identification before any aggressive action, and the enemy was carefully staying within parameters that made such identification difficult to achieve. This created a strategic disadvantage that experienced pilots understood, but felt powerless to address through conventional means. Personal preparation consumed Sarah's off-duty hours as she studied enemy tactics, reviewed combat footage from previous conflicts, and analyzed the performance data of potential threat aircraft. Her quarters resembled a tactical planning center, with maps, aircraft recognition charts, and technical manuals covering every available surface. She had created detailed profiles of enemy pilots based on observed flight patterns and radio intercepts, developing an understanding of their individual capabilities and preferred tactical approaches. This self-directed intelligence gathering represented preparation for opportunities that might never come, but Sarah remained convinced that thorough preparation was the only way to succeed when those opportunities finally presented themselves. The maintenance crews worked around the clock to keep the fighter squadron at peak readiness, their dedication ensuring that every aircraft remained capable of immediate deployment, despite the limitations placed on actual combat operations. Sarah had developed strong relationships with these professionals, learning from their expertise and contributing her own technical knowledge when appropriate. These interactions provided valuable insights into aircraft systems and capabilities that supplemented her formal training with practical knowledge that could prove crucial in combat situations. where technical malfunctions or battle damage required innovative solutions. As weeks passed without change in her status, Sarah began to recognize that waiting for official authorization might mean waiting indefinitely while threats continued to multiply along the border. The enemy was clearly building towards something significant, and the defensive posture maintained by Falcon Ridge Air Force Base seemed inadequate to address the developing situation. Her training, preparation, and innate understanding of aerial combat had brought her to a level of readiness that exceeded many pilots with years of additional experience. But military bureaucracy moved slowly while tactical situations evolved rapidly. The contradiction between her capabilities and her authorized role created tensions that would eventually require resolution through action rather than continued adherence to policies that no longer matched operational realities. The emergency klaxon shattered the pre-dawn silence across Falcon Ridge Air Force Base with 3 sharp blasts that brought every person on duty to immediate attention. Sarah felt her heart rate spike as she recognized the pattern: incoming hostile aircraft, multiple contacts, immediate threat assessment required. She was running toward the command center before the 3rd blast faded, her training taking over despite having no official role in the base's defensive response. Around her, the organized chaos of military emergency procedures unfolded with practiced precision as personnel moved to their assigned positions. Inside the Eagle's Nest Command Center, the atmosphere crackled with tension as radar operators called out contact bearings and estimated arrival times. Major Hayes stood behind the primary console, his coffee forgotten as streams of data flowed across. Multiple screens showing enemy formations approaching from 3 different vectors. The contacts were moving fast, flying in coordinated patterns. That suggested this was no routine probe or training exercise. These were hostile aircraft with clear aggressive intent, and they were heading directly toward the border installations that Falcon Ridge was tasked to protect. Colonel Rivera emerged from his office still adjusting his flight suit, having been awakened by the alert and immediately summoned to assess the developing situation. His experienced eyes swept across the tactical displays, taking in the scope and coordination of the incoming threat with the calculating precision of a commander who had faced similar situations before. The enemy had chosen their timing carefully, launching their attack during the shift change when defensive patrols were transitioning and response times would be maximized. This level of tactical sophistication indicated planning and intelligence that elevated the threat far beyond anything they had previously encountered. Lieutenant Commander Walsh hurried through the command center doors, carrying an armload of intelligence files and reconnaissance photographs that provided crucial context for understanding the enemy's capabilities and likely intentions. Her analysis had been predicting exactly this kind of escalation for weeks, but her warnings had been filtered through bureaucratic layers that prioritized diplomatic solutions over military preparedness. Now her intelligence assessments were proving accurate in the most dangerous possible way, as enemy formations that she had been tracking through reconnaissance reports materialized as active threats requiring immediate response. The radar screens painted a stark picture of overwhelming enemy superiority in numbers, with contacts showing at least 24 hostile aircraft approaching in 3 separate waves designed to saturate the base's defensive capabilities. Thunder Flight could muster only 8 F-35s for immediate response, and even with perfect coordination and favorable engagement conditions, the mathematical reality of air combat suggested that some enemy aircraft would penetrate their defensive screen. The enemy had planned this operation to succeed through numerical advantage, and they had chosen their moment when Falcon Ridge was least prepared to mount an effective defense. Sarah found herself standing near the communications console where urgent radio transmissions painted an increasingly desperate picture of the unfolding situation. Border observation posts were reporting massive enemy formations passing overhead, their observers calling in coordinates and headings that confirmed the radar data flowing into the command center. These weren't isolated incursions or reconnaissance flights, but coordinated attack formations with clear intent to engage and destroy whatever resistance they encountered. The enemy was committing significant resources to this operation, suggesting objectives that went far beyond simple intimidation or testing of response procedures. Captain Thompson was already suiting up for immediate launch, his face grim as he absorbed the tactical briefings that outlined the scope of the threat bearing down on their position. His squadron represented the base's primary defensive capability, but 8 aircraft against 24 represented odds that challenged even the most optimistic assessment of their superior training and equipment advantages. The F-35s were technologically advanced, but they weren't invincible, and air combat remained fundamentally about mathematics and positioning, regardless of the sophistication of individual aircraft systems. Thunder Flight's pilots moved through their pre-flight procedures with the focused intensity of professionals who understood that their next mission might be their last, checking weapons systems and communications equipment with extra care while ground crews performed final inspections on aircraft that would soon face combat conditions. The maintenance teams worked with desperate efficiency, knowing that any mechanical failure or systems malfunction could prove fatal when their pilots encountered enemy fighters designed specifically to kill American aircraft and the people who flew them. The weapons loading teams raced to reconfigure Thunder Flight's ordnance from standard patrol loadouts to full air-to-air combat packages, replacing training rounds with live missiles and ensuring that every aircraft carried maximum defensive capability. The process required precise handling of explosive ordnance under time pressure, as enemy formations continued their approach toward engagement range, while the American defenders scrambled to prepare for a battle that would determine the survival of everyone on the base. Each missile loaded represented potential salvation or destruction, depending on the skill and luck of the pilot, who would ultimately employ it against targets designed to avoid exactly that fate. Colonel Rivera stood before the tactical display, making rapid calculations about deployment patterns and engagement sequences that might provide his outnumbered forces with some chance of success against the approaching enemy formations. His experience in similar situations provided valuable perspective, but the mathematical realities remained unchanged regardless of tactical brilliance or superior training. 8 against 24 meant that even perfect performance by his pilots would likely result in casualties and penetration of their defensive perimeter by surviving enemy aircraft. Sarah watched the preparations unfold around her while fighting the growing certainty she could make a difference in the coming battle if only she were permitted to participate. Lightning Strike sat fully fueled and armed in its hangar, ready for immediate deployment with weapon systems that matched or exceeded anything Thunder Flight could bring to the engagement. Her training scores consistently placed her among the top performers in air-to-air combat scenarios, and her theoretical knowledge of enemy aircraft capabilities was as comprehensive as any pilot on the base. But regulations remained regulations, and age requirements existed for reasons that seemed increasingly irrelevant as enemy formations approached engagement range. The intelligence section provided continuous updates on enemy aircraft types and probable capabilities based on reconnaissance reports and electronic signatures detected by the base's sensor arrays. The approaching formations included advanced fighter aircraft with performance characteristics that matched or exceeded the F-35s in several critical categories, particularly in terms of speed and maneuverability at high altitudes. These weren't obsolete aircraft flown by inadequately trained pilots, but modern fighters operated by competent adversaries who had planned this engagement carefully and equipped themselves appropriately for the mission they intended to accomplish. Communications intercepts revealed that the enemy formations were maintaining strict radio discipline while approaching their target, suggesting professional training and operational security awareness that complicated efforts to predict their specific tactics or targeting priorities. The lack of intercepted communications also indicated confidence in their mission planning and coordination, as pilots who expected to encounter significant resistance typically maintained more frequent radio contact to ensure coordinated responses to unexpected developments. This radio silence suggested that the enemy expected their numerical superiority to overwhelm any resistance without requiring complex tactical adjustments. Major Hayes coordinated with regional air defense commands to request immediate reinforcement from neighboring bases, but the response times for additional aircraft meant that Falcon Ridge would face the initial assault with only their organic defensive capabilities. The nearest fighter squadrons were stationed hundreds of miles away, and even emergency deployment procedures would require at least 40 minutes to get additional aircraft into the engagement area. By that time, the battle would be decided, one way or another, based on the performance of Thunder flight against overwhelming odds. The base's surface-to-air missile systems provided some additional defensive capability, but their range and effectiveness against modern fighter aircraft remained limited by the mobility and countermeasures available to attacking formations. Enemy pilots trained specifically to defeat ground-based air defenses, and their aircraft carried electronic warfare systems designed to disrupt missile guidance and radar tracking. The SAM sites would contribute to the base's defense, but they couldn't be relied upon to stop determined attackers operating modern equipment and employing appropriate tactics. Ground personnel throughout the base took shelter in hardened facilities designed to protect against air attack, while essential personnel remained at their posts to maintain communications and coordinate defensive operations. The base's survival depended on the ability of Thunder flight to prevent enemy aircraft from reaching their targets, but everyone understood that some attacks would likely penetrate the defensive screen, regardless of how well the American pilots performed. This reality created an atmosphere of controlled fear as people prepared for the possibility of direct attack, while hoping that their defenders would prove equal to the challenge. Sarah felt the weight of her exclusion from the coming battle with increasing intensity as preparations continued around her without any consideration of her potential contribution. Lightning Strike represented 20% of the base's available fighter aircraft, sitting unused in its hangar while enemy formations approached with clear intent to overwhelm the defending forces through numerical superiority. The mathematical logic was inescapable. Every additional aircraft that could be brought into the engagement improved the defenders' chances of success, but military regulations prioritized bureaucratic compliance over operational necessity, even in the face of existential threats. Part 3. The World Building. The high desert environment surrounding Falcon Ridge Air Force Base created unique challenges for aerial combat operations, with thermal columns and wind patterns that could dramatically affect aircraft performance and weapons accuracy. Sarah had spent countless hours studying these atmospheric conditions during her training flights, developing an intuitive understanding of how the desert thermals behaved at different times of day and seasons. The morning air was relatively stable, but as the sun climbed higher, convective heating would create turbulence that could disrupt missile guidance systems and affect the maneuverability of high-performance aircraft. The base itself sprawled across several square miles of carefully maintained facilities designed to support continuous fighter operations in one of the most demanding environments on Earth. Runways built to military specifications stretched across the desert floor, their surfaces treated with specialized coatings that could withstand the extreme temperature variations and abrasive effects of windborne sand. Hangars constructed from reinforced materials provided protection for valuable aircraft, while maintenance facilities contained the sophisticated equipment necessary to keep modern fighters operational in conditions that challenged every system and component. Thunder Mesa Flight Academy occupied a separate section of the installation, its training facilities designed to prepare pilots for the realities of desert combat operations, while providing the advanced instruction necessary for modern air warfare. Sarah had spent 2 intensive years at Thunder Mesa, progressing through increasingly complex training programs that culminated in her certification as a fighter pilot. The Academy's reputation for excellence was built on demanding standards and realistic training scenarios that prepared graduates for the full spectrum of aerial combat situations they might encounter in actual operations. The Verde Canyon sector represented the most challenging terrain in the region, with narrow passages and sharp elevation changes that required precise navigation and exceptional flying skills to traverse safely. Enemy aircraft approaching from this direction would need to navigate these same obstacles, but they could also use the terrain to mask their approach and complicate defensive targeting. Sarah had flown training missions through Verde Canyon dozens of times, memorizing every ridge and outcropping while developing the spatial awareness necessary to maintain orientation during high-speed, low-altitude flight through complex terrain. Pine Valley served as the primary civilian population center in the region, a small border town whose residents depended on Falcon Ridge Air Force Base for both economic stability and physical security. The town's proximity to the contested frontier made it vulnerable to the same threats that faced the military installation, but its civilian infrastructure lacked the hardened facilities and defensive systems that provided some protection for military personnel. Any failure of the base's defensive capabilities would likely result in civilian casualties as enemy aircraft sought targets of opportunity after completing their primary missions. The Crimson Ridge Mountains formed a natural barrier along the eastern border, their jagged peaks rising to elevations that challenged even high-performance military aircraft. These mountains provided some defensive advantage by channeling approaching aircraft into predictable corridors, but they also created radar shadows that enemy formations could exploit to mask their approach until reaching engagement range. The combination of high altitude and complex terrain made this region particularly dangerous for air combat operations, as pilots had to manage both enemy threats and environmental hazards simultaneously. Desert weather patterns added another layer of complexity to air operations, with sudden sandstorms that could reduce visibility to near zero, and wind shears that could cause catastrophic aircraft control problems. The meteorological section maintained continuous monitoring of atmospheric conditions, providing updates that helped pilots anticipate and avoid dangerous weather phenomena. However, the desert environment remained inherently unpredictable, and even experienced pilots could find themselves facing conditions that challenged their skills and threatened their survival. The base's radar installations provided comprehensive coverage of the surrounding airspace. Their powerful transmitters, capable of detecting aircraft at extreme ranges, while sophisticated computers analyze the signals to determine aircraft types and probable intentions. However, modern military aircraft incorporated stealth technologies and electronic countermeasures designed specifically to defeat radar detection, creating an ongoing technological competition between sensors and the systems designed to avoid them. The radar operators who monitored these systems required extensive training to distinguish between genuine threats and the false signals generated by natural phenomena or deliberate deception. Fuel storage and distribution systems represented critical vulnerabilities for any airbase, as fighter aircraft consumed enormous quantities of specially formulated aviation fuel during combat operations. Falcon Ridge maintained large reserves of fuel in underground storage facilities designed to survive direct attack, but the distribution systems that delivered fuel to individual aircraft remained exposed to enemy action. Any disruption of fuel supplies would quickly ground the entire fighter force regardless of their pilot's skill or motivation to continue fighting. Communication systems linked Falcon Ridge to the broader network of military installations and command centers that coordinated regional defense operations. But these same systems could become targets for enemy electronic warfare attacks, designed to disrupt coordination and command effectiveness. The communications specialists who operated these systems required constant training to maintain operational capability in the face of jamming and other forms of electronic attack. Backup systems provided some redundancy, but sophisticated adversaries possessed the capability to disrupt multiple communications channels simultaneously. The armament storage areas contained the missiles, bombs, and cannon ammunition necessary to sustain combat operations, their contents representing millions of dollars worth of precision weaponry designed for specific tactical applications. Each weapon type required specialized handling procedures and storage conditions to maintain reliability and safety, while the loading procedures demanded careful attention to detail to ensure proper integration with aircraft systems. The armament specialists who managed these facilities understood that their work directly affected the survival chances of every pilot who flew combat missions from the base. Medical facilities prepared for the possibility of combat casualties, with trauma teams standing by to treat injuries ranging from ejection seat trauma to severe burns and fragmentation wounds. The medical personnel had trained extensively for combat situations, but their experience remained largely theoretical until actual casualties arrived requiring immediate life-saving intervention. Emergency procedures had been rehearsed repeatedly, but the reality of treating pilots injured in air combat would test both their technical skills and emotional resilience under extreme stress. Security forces protected the base's perimeter and critical facilities from ground-based threats. Their training focused on repelling infiltration attempts and sabotage operations that might accompany air attacks. These personnel operated specialized equipment designed to detect and engage threats approaching on foot or in vehicles, but their effectiveness depended on early warning and coordination with other defensive systems. The integration of ground and air defenses required constant practice and communication to avoid friendly fire incidents while maintaining comprehensive coverage of all potential attack vectors. The base's power generation and distribution systems provided the electricity necessary to operate radar installations, communications equipment, and all the other technological systems that modern air operations required. Backup generators ensured continued operation even if primary power sources were damaged, but the complexity of these systems created multiple potential failure points that enemy attacks might exploit. The engineers responsible for maintaining these systems worked around the clock to ensure reliability while preparing contingency plans for continued operation under combat conditions. Water treatment and distribution facilities served both practical and strategic purposes, providing the clean water necessary for personnel survival, while supporting the specialized requirements of aircraft maintenance and weapon systems. The desert environment made water particularly precious, and any disruption of these systems would quickly affect the base's ability to sustain operations. Storage reserves provided some buffer against short-term disruptions, but extended combat operations would require continued access to reliable water sources. Food service operations prepared to sustain personnel through extended periods of combat operations, with emergency rations supplementing regular meal service to ensure adequate nutrition under stressful conditions. The psychological importance of maintaining normal routines, including regular meals, could not be underestimated when personnel faced the stress and uncertainty of combat operations. The food service staff understood their role in maintaining morale and operational effectiveness through consistent provision of nutritious meals, regardless of external circumstances. Part 4. The Social Contrast. The officers' dining facility buzzed with nervous energy as pilots from Thunder Flight grabbed quick breakfast before their emergency launch, their conversations a mixture of tactical planning and gallows humor that helped mask the anxiety everyone felt about the approaching enemy formations. Captain Tyler Brooks sat at a corner table reviewing approach vectors while methodically consuming eggs and coffee, his usual swagger tempered by the reality of facing odds that challenged even his considerable self-confidence. Around him, younger pilots sought reassurance from more experienced squadron members while trying to project the calm professionalism expected of military aviators preparing for their first real combat mission. Sarah entered the dining facility to grab a quick meal before the anticipated chaos of combat operations made normal routines impossible, and the conversation around Brooks' table immediately shifted to acknowledge her presence with the kind of awkward politeness that characterized most of her interactions with the squadron's pilot community. Brooks glanced up from his charts with a sardonic smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, his voice carrying just enough volume to ensure that nearby tables could hear his comments about the irony of having qualified pilots sitting on the ground while the base faced its greatest threat in years. The informal hierarchy within the pilot community placed enormous emphasis on combat experience and mission completion statistics, creating social dynamics that automatically relegated Sarah to the bottom of any group discussion, regardless of her training scores or technical knowledge. Pilots who had completed dozens of routine patrol missions considered themselves inherently more qualified than someone who had never faced actual enemy aircraft, even though none of them had ever engaged in air-to-air combat either. This created a circular logic where combat experience was required to gain respect, but opportunities to gain combat experience were restricted to those who already possessed the respect of their peers. Lieutenant Jake Morrison, one of the newer additions to Thunder Flight, attempted to include Sarah in the tactical discussions by asking her opinion about enemy aircraft capabilities and probable attack patterns. His question drew sharp looks from the more senior pilots, who viewed such inclusion as inappropriate given her lack of official mission status and questioned whether sharing tactical information with non-participating personnel violated operational security protocols. Morrison quickly retreated from his attempt at inclusion, leaving Sarah to observe the planning discussions from the periphery, while her insights remained unheard and unutilized. The squadron's informal social gatherings typically took place in the officers' club, where mission debriefings evolved into extended discussions about tactics, aircraft performance, and the personal experiences that built the shared identity of the pilot community. Sarah rarely attended these sessions, knowing that her presence would create uncomfortable dynamics as pilots struggled to reconcile her obvious competence with their belief that age and experience were prerequisites for meaningful participation in their professional discussions. Her absence reinforced her isolation while denying her access to the informal knowledge sharing that often proved more valuable than official training programs. Captain Thompson emerged from the briefing room carrying mission folders that outlined Thunder Flight's defensive plan, his expression grim as he distributed assignments that would determine which pilots flew against the approaching enemy formations. Sarah watched from across the room as he handed folders to 8 pilots, knowing that her name would not appear on any assignment despite Lightning Strike's availability and her own readiness for immediate deployment. The exclusion felt particularly acute given the desperate circumstances facing the base and the obvious need for every available aircraft to participate in the defensive effort. The maintenance crews who serviced both Thunder Flight's F-35s and Sarah's F-22 maintained a different perspective on pilot qualifications, basing their respect on technical knowledge and aircraft handling skills, rather than mission statistics or age-based hierarchies. Sergeant O'Connor had worked with Sarah extensively during her training period and consistently praised her understanding of aircraft systems and her careful treatment of sophisticated equipment. His opinions carried weight with other maintenance personnel, creating a pocket of support that contrasted sharply with the skepticism she encountered from the pilot community. Communications between the pilot community and base leadership reflected the broader military culture that prioritized hierarchical decision-making and adherence to established protocols, even when circumstances might warrant flexibility in normal procedures. Colonel Rivera's instructions to Thunder Flight emphasize strict compliance with engagement rules and formation discipline, reflecting his experience with similar situations, while also demonstrating the conservative approach that had characterized his entire command tenure. This emphasis on established procedures left little room for unconventional solutions or the kind of innovative thinking that desperate circumstances might require. The intelligence briefings provided to Thunder Flight included detailed assessments of enemy aircraft capabilities and probable tactics, but these sessions excluded Sarah despite her extensive study of the same information and her demonstrated understanding of air combat theory. Lieutenant Commander Walsh had privately expressed frustration with this exclusion, arguing that Sarah's theoretical knowledge complemented the practical experience of other pilots and could contribute valuable insights to mission planning. However, formal briefing protocols required specific authorization levels that Sarah had not yet achieved due to her age and lack of combat experience. Squadron traditions and informal customs created additional barriers to Sarah's integration into the pilot community, with established rituals and shared experiences that reinforced group identity while excluding those who had not participated in similar rites of passage. The patches, call signs, and informal recognition systems that characterized military aviation culture all depended on combat mission completion and peer acceptance that remained beyond Sarah's reach regardless of her individual qualifications. These cultural elements served important functions in building unit cohesion, but they also created obstacles for exceptional individuals who didn't fit standard patterns. The gender dynamics within the predominantly male pilot community added complexity to Sarah's situation, as some officers questioned whether protective instincts influenced the reluctance to deploy young female pilots in combat situations. However, Sarah's age provided a more obvious explanation for her exclusion that allowed everyone to avoid confronting potential gender-based discrimination while maintaining the appearance of objective policy implementation. This dynamic created ambiguity about the true reasons for her continued exclusion from combat operations, making it difficult to address the underlying issues through normal channels. Training partnerships and mentorship relationships within the squadron typically developed between pilots of similar experience levels, or through formal instructor-student arrangements that provided structure for knowledge transfer and professional development. Sarah's unique position as a highly qualified pilot without combat experience made it difficult to establish these relationships, as senior pilots felt uncertain about appropriate boundaries, while junior pilots questioned their ability to learn from someone who had never flown actual missions. This isolation limited her access to the informal learning opportunities that helped other pilots develop beyond their initial training. The competitive environment that characterized military aviation created additional pressure for pilots to distinguish themselves through individual achievement and recognition, leading to subtle conflicts over mission assignments and opportunities for advancement. Sarah's presence as a highly capable pilot who remained excluded from meaningful assignments created uncomfortable reminders of the arbitrary nature of some career advancement factors, while highlighting the gap between individual merit and institutional opportunity. These dynamics encouraged other pilots to rationalize her exclusion to avoid confronting similar vulnerabilities in their own career prospects. Base social events and informal gatherings reflected the broader challenges of integrating someone who occupied an ambiguous position within the military hierarchy, as Sarah's technical status as a qualified pilot conflicted with her practical exclusion from the primary mission of the unit. Invitations to squadron social functions became awkward exercises in inclusion and exclusion, with hosts uncertain about appropriate protocols while other attendees struggled to find common ground for conversation. These social difficulties reinforced her professional isolation while limiting opportunities to build the personal relationships that often proved crucial for career advancement in military organizations. Part 5. The hidden depth, Sarah's personal quarters reflected the intensity of her self-directed study program, with technical manuals, reconnaissance photographs, and tactical analyses covering every available surface in an organized chaos that would have impressed any intelligence analyst. Her comprehensive files on enemy aircraft capabilities included performance data she had compiled from multiple sources, creating detailed profiles that went far beyond the standard briefing materials available to most pilots. She had spent countless hours correlating engine specifications with observed flight patterns, building a database of knowledge that could prove invaluable in actual combat situations, if she were ever given the opportunity to apply it. The simulation logs stored on her personal computer documented hundreds of hours of virtual combat training against every known enemy aircraft type, with scenarios ranging from single aircraft engagements to large-scale formation battles that tested her ability to manage complex tactical situations. Her success rates in these simulations consistently exceeded squadron averages, but virtual victories carried no weight in the real-world evaluation systems that determined combat assignments. She had pushed the simulation programs to their limits, creating custom scenarios based on intelligence reports and testing tactical approaches that pushed beyond conventional doctrine. Her flying notebook contained detailed observations from every training flight she had completed, with notes on aircraft performance, characteristics under various atmospheric conditions, and careful documentation of how environmental factors affected weapons systems accuracy. The desert environment around Falcon Ridge presented unique challenges that required specialized knowledge to navigate safely, and Sarah had systematically cataloged wind patterns, thermal columns, and visibility conditions that could affect combat operations. This information represented practical knowledge that could only be gained through extensive flight time and careful observation. The technical modifications she had implemented in lightning strike systems went beyond standard configurations, with software adjustments and hardware optimizations that improved performance while remaining within acceptable parameters. Her understanding of the F-22's capabilities exceeded that of most pilots with years of additional experience, as she had studied every system and subsystem with the thoroughness of someone who knew that comprehensive knowledge might compensate for lack of operational experience. The maintenance crews had been impressed by her technical suggestions and her ability to diagnose system problems that less knowledgeable pilots might have missed. Her collection of combat footage from previous conflicts included detailed analyses of successful and unsuccessful tactical approaches, with frame-by-frame breakdowns of engagement sequences that revealed subtle factors affecting mission outcomes. She had studied the performance of legendary pilots from various air forces, identifying common elements in their approaches while noting how technological advances had changed the fundamental nature of air combat. This historical perspective provided context for modern tactical development while highlighting principles that remained constant, regardless of specific aircraft capabilities. The language skills she had developed during her personal study program included conversational proficiency in several languages spoken by potential adversaries, providing her with the ability to understand intercepted communications and gain insights into enemy thinking that might prove valuable during actual operations. Her linguistic capabilities remained unknown to most of her colleagues, as they had never been formally tested or documented in her official records. However, these skills represented another dimension of preparation that could provide unexpected advantages in combat situations where intelligence gathering and situational awareness determined survival. Her physical conditioning program exceeded standard requirements for fighter pilots, with specialized exercises designed to improve G-force tolerance and enhance the stamina necessary for extended combat operations. She had researched the physiological demands of air combat extensively, developing training routines that address specific challenges faced by pilots during high-stress maneuvering and multi-aircraft engagements. Her fitness levels consistently tested at the top of squadron rankings, providing her with physical capabilities that could prove crucial during demanding mission profiles. The psychological preparation techniques she had developed through extensive research into combat stress management included meditation practices and mental rehearsal exercises that helped maintain focus and decision-making capability under extreme pressure. She had studied the psychological factors that affected pilot performance during combat, identifying common stress responses and developing countermeasures that could help maintain effectiveness when facing life-threatening situations. This mental training remained invisible to outside observers, but represented a crucial component of her overall preparation for combat operations. Her understanding of electronic warfare principles and countermeasures exceeded the knowledge level of most pilots, as she had studied these systems extensively while recognizing their increasing importance in modern air combat. She could operate jammers and defensive systems with the expertise of a dedicated electronic warfare officer, providing her with capabilities that could prove invaluable when facing sophisticated enemy radar and missile systems. This specialized knowledge represented another area where her preparation exceeded that of pilots with more conventional training backgrounds. The tactical innovations she had developed through simulation and theoretical analysis included unconventional approaches to common combat situations that could provide advantages when facing enemies who expected standard responses. Her creative thinking had produced novel solutions to tactical problems, but these innovations remained untested in actual combat situations where their effectiveness could be verified. She had documented these approaches carefully, creating a personal tactical manual that reflected her unique perspective on air combat operations. Her mechanical skills and understanding of aircraft maintenance procedures enabled her to perform basic repairs and system modifications that other pilots typically left to specialized technicians. This hands-on knowledge provided her with deeper insights into aircraft capabilities and limitations, while ensuring that she could maintain her aircraft's performance even when normal maintenance support might be unavailable. The maintenance crews appreciated her technical competence and her willingness to understand their work rather than simply accepting aircraft as delivered. The intelligence analysis techniques she had taught herself through independent study enabled her to process reconnaissance information and electronic intercepts with the skill of a trained analyst, providing her with the ability to assess enemy capabilities and intentions beyond the standard briefing materials available to most pilots. She had developed methods for correlating diverse information sources to build comprehensive threat assessments that could inform tactical planning and mission execution. This analytical capability represented another dimension of her preparation that distinguished her from pilots who relied primarily on official intelligence summaries. Her knowledge of international law and rules of engagement exceeded standard requirements, as she had studied the legal frameworks governing military operations with the thoroughness of someone who understood that legal considerations could affect tactical decision-making in complex situations. She had analyzed case studies of previous conflicts where legal constraints influenced operational choices, developing an understanding of how political and legal factors interacted with military considerations. This knowledge could prove valuable when facing situations where strict adherence to engagement rules determined mission success or failure. The contingency planning she had developed for various emergency scenarios included detailed procedures for aircraft system failures, combat damage, and other situations that could threaten mission success or pilot survival. She had studied accident reports and after-action reviews to identify common failure modes and develop appropriate responses that could be implemented under stress. This preparation included memorization of emergency procedures that went beyond standard checklists, providing her with the knowledge necessary to handle situations that formal training might not have covered adequately. Her study of enemy pilot training methods and tactical doctrine provided insights into adversary decision-making processes that could be exploited during actual combat engagements. She had analyzed captured documents and debriefing reports to understand how enemy pilots were trained and what tactical approaches they were most likely to employ under various circumstances. This knowledge of enemy thinking could provide crucial advantages when predicting adversary actions and developing appropriate countermeasures during dynamic combat situations. The regulatory framework governing pilot deployment created an inflexible system where chronological age carried more weight than demonstrated competence or operational necessity. Colonel Rivera's adherence to these regulations reflected decades of military experience that had taught him the value of standardized procedures, but it also demonstrated the institutional rigidity that prevented adaptive responses to unique circumstances. The minimum age requirements had been established based on statistical analyses of pilot performance and psychological development, creating broad guidelines that failed to account for exceptional individuals who exceeded normal developmental patterns. Administrative protocols required extensive documentation and approval processes for any deviation from standard operating procedures, creating bureaucratic obstacles that could take weeks or months to navigate even under normal circumstances. The emergency-facing Falcon Ridge Air Force Base provided no time for such lengthy approval processes, but the institutional framework offered no mechanisms for rapid exception processing when operational requirements conflicted with regulatory constraints. This bureaucratic inflexibility meant that potentially valuable resources remained unutilized while enemy forces approached with clear hostile intent. The command structure that governed fighter operations emphasized hierarchical decision-making and clear chains of responsibility, principles that served important functions in maintaining discipline and coordination during complex military operations. However, these same principles could become obstacles when unusual circumstances required innovative solutions or when existing policies failed to address unique situations adequately. Colonel Rivera's position within this hierarchy required him to balance operational effectiveness against regulatory compliance, often forcing choices between optimal tactical solutions and institutional expectations. Personnel evaluation systems focused heavily on experience metrics and completion of specific career milestones that typically required years to achieve, creating advancement pathways that favored gradual progression over exceptional performance. Sarah's rapid completion of advanced training programs and superior performance ratings carried less weight than the combat experience she could not obtain due to age restrictions, illustrating the circular logic that prevented talented individuals from accessing the opportunities necessary to prove their capabilities. This system rewarded conformity to established patterns while penalizing excellence that developed outside normal timelines. The risk assessment protocols that influenced deployment decisions reflected institutional memories of past failures and accidents, creating conservative approaches that prioritized avoiding negative outcomes over maximizing positive potential. The military's responsibility for personnel safety created legitimate concerns about deploying young pilots in combat situations, but these same safety considerations could prevent optimal utilization of available resources when facing existential threats. The balance between acceptable risk and operational necessity remains subjective, influenced by personal experiences and institutional cultures that varied among different commanders. Training certification requirements established minimum standards for combat deployment that included specific experience thresholds and completion of designated programs, creating objective criteria that could be applied consistently across all personnel. However, these same requirements failed to account for individuals who exceeded standard performance expectations or who possessed relevant capabilities that weren't captured by conventional evaluation methods. Sarah's extensive self-directed training and exceptional simulation performance remained officially irrelevant because they didn't align with established certification pathways. The legal frameworks governing military operations included specific provisions about personnel deployment that reflected both practical considerations and political sensitivities regarding the use of young service members in combat roles. These legal constraints operated independently of tactical requirements, creating situations where military commanders faced restrictions that might compromise operational effectiveness for reasons unrelated to military considerations. The intersection of legal, political, and operational factors created complex decision-making environments where optimal tactical choices might be legally or politically unacceptable. Inter-service coordination requirements meant that personnel policies at Falcon Ridge had to align with broader military standards that applied across multiple branches and installations, preventing local commanders from implementing tailored solutions that might better serve their specific operational requirements. This standardization served important functions in maintaining consistency and facilitating personnel transfers between different units, but it also prevented adaptive responses to unique local circumstances or exceptional individual capabilities that didn't fit standard patterns. The documentation requirements for combat deployment included extensive medical and psychological evaluations that assessed pilot readiness for the stress and danger of actual combat operations. These evaluations served legitimate purposes in ensuring that deployed personnel possessed the mental and physical capabilities necessary for survival in combat environments, but they also created additional gatekeeping mechanisms that could exclude qualified individuals based on subjective assessments or bureaucratic delays. The evaluation process required time and resources that weren't available during emergency situations requiring immediate response. Career development pathways within the pilot community emphasized gradual progression through increasingly responsible positions, with combat experience serving as a prerequisite for advancement to senior roles. This system ensured that leaders possessed relevant experience and credibility with their subordinates, but it also created barriers for exceptional individuals who might be capable of handling advanced responsibilities earlier than normal career timelines would suggest. The emphasis on traditional career progression could prevent the identification and utilization of exceptional talent when it was most needed. Resource allocation decisions reflected institutional priorities that balanced multiple competing demands. For limited assets, with aircraft and personnel assignments based on established protocols rather than dynamic assessment of optimal deployment strategies. Sarah's F-22 remained grounded not because of any deficiency in the aircraft or pilot, but because bureaucratic systems lacked mechanisms for rapidly reassessing resource utilization when circumstances changed dramatically. This institutional inertia could prevent effective responses to evolving threats that required flexible deployment of available capabilities. The oversight mechanisms that governed military operations included review processes and accountability systems designed to ensure appropriate use of military assets and personnel, creating additional layers of bureaucracy that could slow decision-making during time-critical situations. These oversight functions served important purposes in maintaining civilian control of military operations and ensuring responsible use of public resources, but they could also create obstacles when rapid response was essential for mission success. The balance between accountability and operational flexibility remained a constant challenge for military commanders. Professional development programs emphasized standardized training and certification processes that ensured consistent baseline capabilities across all personnel. But these same programs could fail to recognize or develop exceptional abilities that exceeded normal standards. Sarah's capabilities in areas like technical analysis and tactical innovation remained largely unrecognized because they developed outside formal training programs and weren't measured by standard evaluation criteria. This could result in underutilization of valuable human resources during critical situations. The cultural expectations within military aviation emphasized experience-based credibility and adherence to established traditions that served important functions in maintaining unit cohesion and professional standards. However, these same cultural factors could create resistance to innovative approaches or exceptional individuals who challenged conventional thinking about pilot qualifications and capabilities. The tension between respecting tradition and embracing innovation remained a constant challenge for military organizations, trying to maintain effectiveness in rapidly changing operational environments. Budget constraints and resource limitations influenced personnel policies by creating pressure to maximize return on training investments and minimize risks that could result in loss of expensive assets or highly trained personnel. The cost of training a fighter pilot represented a substantial investment that created institutional pressure to protect that investment through conservative deployment policies, even when operational requirements might justify accepting higher risks. This economic dimension of personnel policy could conflict with optimal tactical utilization of available resources. Part 7. The expertise building the pre-dawn hours at Falcon Ridge belonged to Sarah in ways that daylight never could, as she utilized the quiet period before normal base operations to conduct intensive personal training sessions that pushed her capabilities far beyond standard requirements. Her routine began each morning at 0400 hours with physical conditioning specifically designed for combat aviation, including exercises that improved G-force tolerance and enhanced the fine motor control necessary for precise aircraft handling under extreme stress. The empty gymnasium became her laboratory for exploring the physical limits of human performance in preparation for combat situations that would test every aspect of her conditioning. Flight simulation sessions occupied the majority of her available time outside official duties, with Sarah developing increasingly complex scenarios that challenged her tactical decision-making and aircraft handling skills under simulated combat conditions. She had gained access to advanced simulation software through her connections with the training staff, allowing her to create custom scenarios based on current intelligence about enemy capabilities and probable tactics. These simulations went far beyond standard training programs, incorporating variables like equipment failures, adverse weather conditions, and multi-threat environments that tested her ability to adapt and overcome unexpected challenges. Her technical knowledge of aircraft systems exceeded that of most pilots with years of additional experience, as she had systematically studied every component and subsystem of the F-22 Raptor with the thoroughness of an aerospace engineer. She understood the intricate relationships between different systems and could predict how various failure modes might affect aircraft performance during combat operations. This knowledge enabled her to optimize aircraft performance settings for specific mission profiles while also preparing her to handle emergency situations that might require innovative solutions to keep damaged aircraft operational. The tactical analysis she conducted each evening involved detailed study of enemy aircraft capabilities, pilot training methods, and operational doctrines that could influence the outcome of potential air-to-air engagements. She had compiled comprehensive profiles of every known enemy aircraft type, including performance specifications, weapons capabilities, and typical employment tactics that enemy pilots were trained to use. This information came from multiple sources including intelligence reports, technical manuals, and after-action reviews from previous conflicts involving similar aircraft and opponents. Her language studies had progressed to the point where she could understand intercepted enemy communications and gain insights into adversary thinking that might prove valuable during actual combat operations. She had focused particularly on military terminology and tactical phraseology used by potential opponents, developing the ability to interpret radio intercepts and electronic intelligence that could provide advance warning of enemy intentions. This linguistic capability represented a unique skill set that could enhance situational awareness during combat operations where information superiority often determined survival. The weapons systems training she pursued independently included detailed study of missile capabilities, guidance systems, and countermeasures that could affect the outcome of air-to-air engagements. She understood the technical specifications of every weapon in the American inventory, as well as those employed by potential adversaries, enabling her to make informed decisions about engagement ranges, target priorities, and defensive tactics based on specific weapon system characteristics. This knowledge extended to electronic warfare systems and countermeasures that could disrupt enemy weapons while protecting her own aircraft from hostile fire. Her understanding of radar systems and electronic signatures enabled her to predict how different aircraft would appear to enemy sensors and how various flight profiles might affect detection probability. She had studied stealth technology extensively, learning how to optimize her aircraft's radar cross-section through careful attention to flight angles and power management. This knowledge could prove crucial when attempting to achieve surprise or avoid detection during combat operations where being seen first often meant being shot first. The meteorological knowledge she had accumulated through extensive study of desert weather patterns enabled her to predict atmospheric conditions that could affect aircraft performance and weapons accuracy. She understood how temperature inversions, wind shear, and thermal columns behaved at different times of day and seasons, providing her with the ability to anticipate environmental factors that could influence tactical decision-making. This specialized knowledge of local weather phenomena could provide advantages when planning flight routes and engagement tactics that utilized environmental conditions to maximum effect. Her mechanical skills extended beyond normal pilot requirements to include understanding of maintenance procedures and repair techniques that could prove valuable when normal support wasn't available. She had worked extensively with maintenance crews to understand aircraft systems from a practical perspective, learning how to diagnose problems and perform basic repairs that might be necessary during extended operations away from main base facilities. This hands-on experience provided her with confidence that she could maintain her aircraft's operational status even under adverse conditions. The psychological preparation techniques she had developed included stress management methods and mental rehearsal exercises designed to maintain cognitive performance under the extreme pressure of life-threatening combat situations. She had studied the psychological factors that affected pilot performance during air combat, identifying common stress responses and developing countermeasures that could help maintain effectiveness when facing experienced enemies determined to kill her. This mental training included visualization exercises that prepared her for the emotional and psychological challenges of taking human life in defense of her country and colleagues. Her tactical innovation went beyond standard doctrine to include creative approaches to common combat problems that could provide advantages when facing enemies who expected conventional responses. She had developed novel tactics for various engagement scenarios, including methods for defeating numerically superior opponents through superior positioning and timing. These innovative approaches remained untested in actual combat, but represented original thinking that could prove valuable when conventional tactics proved insufficient against determined adversaries. The intelligence analysis capabilities she had developed through self-directed study enabled her to process reconnaissance information and electronic intercepts with professional-level competency, providing her with the ability to assess enemy capabilities and intentions beyond standard briefing materials. She had learned to correlate diverse information sources to build comprehensive threat assessments that could inform tactical planning and mission execution. This analytical skill set represented another dimension of her preparation that distinguished her from pilots who relied primarily on official intelligence summaries. Her knowledge of international law and rules of engagement reflected understanding that legal considerations could affect tactical decision-making in complex operational environments where political factors influenced military operations. She had studied the legal frameworks governing air combat operations, including restrictions on weapons employment and requirements for positive target identification that could limit tactical options during actual engagements. This knowledge could prove valuable when making split-second decisions that had to balance military effectiveness against legal and political constraints. The contingency planning she had developed for various emergency scenarios included detailed procedures for handling aircraft system failures, combat damage, and other situations that could threaten mission success or pilot survival. She had analyzed accident reports and combat loss investigations to identify common failure modes and develop appropriate responses that could be implemented under extreme stress. This preparation included memorization of emergency procedures that went beyond standard checklists, providing her with the knowledge necessary to handle situations that formal training might not have covered adequately. Her understanding of formation tactics and air-to-air coordination enabled her to integrate effectively with other aircraft during complex multiplane operations that required precise timing and communication. She had studied the coordination challenges involved in large-scale air combat operations, learning how individual aircraft could contribute to overall mission success while maintaining the situational awareness necessary for personal survival. This knowledge of formation dynamics could prove crucial when operating as part of larger defensive efforts against numerically superior enemy formations. Part 8. The Critical Insight. The pattern recognition that had been developing in Sarah's mind throughout weeks of studying enemy approach vectors suddenly crystallized as she observed the latest radar contacts displayed on the command centers. Tactical screens. The enemy formations were approaching in a coordinated pattern that matched textbook tactics for overwhelming air defenses through simultaneous multi-axis attacks. But their timing and spacing revealed something that the official intelligence assessment had missed. The mathematical precision of their coordination suggested they possessed detailed knowledge of Falcon Ridge's defensive capabilities and response procedures, indicating intelligence gathering that went far beyond casual observation. Her analysis of the enemy flight profiles revealed subtle variations in approach speeds and altitudes that suggested different aircraft types with distinct mission roles, creating a more complex threat picture than the initial assessments had indicated. The lid formations appeared to be equipped for air-to-air combat, while trailing groups showed flight characteristics consistent with ground attack aircraft configured for strikes against fixed targets. This combination indicated a comprehensive assault plan designed to first eliminate defending fighters before proceeding to destroy base infrastructure and aircraft on the ground. The timing of the attack coincided precisely with the scheduled rotation of Thunder Flight's patrol aircraft, suggesting that enemy intelligence had identified the brief window when defensive coverage would be minimized during crew changes and refueling operations. This level of operational intelligence indicated sophisticated reconnaissance and planning that elevated the threat far beyond a simple probing attack or demonstration of force. The enemy had clearly studied Falcon Ridge's operations extensively and had chosen their moment to maximize their chances of success while minimizing their own losses. Sarah's understanding of desert atmospheric conditions enabled her to recognize that the enemy had also timed their attack to take advantage of thermal columns and wind patterns that would complicate radar tracking and missile guidance for the defending forces. The morning temperature differential between the desert floor and higher altitudes created atmospheric disturbances that could degrade sensor performance while providing opportunities for attacking aircraft to mask their approach. Using natural phenomena. This environmental awareness suggested enemy pilots with extensive training in desert operations and detailed knowledge of local weather patterns. The electronic signatures detected by the base's sensor arrays included emissions consistent with advanced jamming systems and electronic countermeasures that could disrupt American radar and communications during the engagement. Sarah recognized the specific patterns from her extensive study of enemy electronic warfare capabilities, realizing that the attacking force possessed sophisticated systems designed specifically to counter American defensive technologies. This electronic warfare dimension of the attack would significantly complicate the defensive response by degrading the situational awareness and coordination that Thunder Flight needed to operate effectively against numerically superior opponents. Her analysis of the enemy formation structure revealed tactical innovations that diverged from standard doctrine, suggesting highly trained pilots who had developed specialized techniques for attacking American air bases. The spacing between aircraft and their altitude variations indicated preparation for specific defensive responses, with contingency plans that accounted for various American tactical approaches. This level of preparation suggested that the enemy had studied American tactics extensively and had developed countermeasures designed to exploit known weaknesses in standard defensive procedures. The weapons loadouts indicated by the flight profiles suggested that enemy aircraft carried a mixture of air-to-air and air-to-ground ordnance optimized for the specific mission of destroying Falcon Ridge's defensive capabilities while minimizing their own exposure to ground-based defenses. Sarah's knowledge of enemy weapons systems enabled her to predict engagement ranges and tactical options that the attacking pilots would likely employ against Thunder Flight's F-35s. This weapons analysis revealed that the enemy possessed missiles with performance characteristics that matched or exceeded American capabilities in several critical categories. Her understanding of enemy pilot training methods enabled her to predict how the attacking formations would likely respond to various defensive tactics that Thunder Flight might employ during the engagement. Enemy pilots trained in their Air Force's doctrine would follow predictable patterns when facing American aircraft, but they had also demonstrated tactical innovations that suggested adaptation specifically for this mission. This knowledge of enemy decision-making processes could provide crucial advantages if Sarah were able to participate in the defensive response. The psychological profile she had developed of enemy Air Force culture suggested that their pilots would be highly motivated and well prepared for this mission, with training that emphasized aggressive tactics and acceptance of casualties to achieve mission objectives. This warrior culture created opponents who would not be easily deterred by initial resistance, and who would likely press their attacks even when facing determined opposition. Understanding this mindset was crucial for predicting enemy behavior during the dynamic conditions of air combat, where psychological factors often determine tactical outcomes. Sarah's analysis of the intelligence picture revealed gaps in the official assessment that could prove critical during the actual engagement, including underestimation of enemy electronic warfare capabilities and failure to recognize the sophisticated nature of their mission planning. The briefings provided to Thunder Flight reflected standard threat assessments that didn't account for the specific intelligence, preparation, and tactical innovation that the enemy had clearly invested in this operation. These intelligence gaps could lead to tactical decisions based on incorrect assumptions about enemy capabilities and intentions. Her recognition of the pattern extended beyond immediate tactical concerns to include understanding of the broader strategic context that had motivated this attack, with implications for how the engagement might develop and what secondary threats might emerge during or after the initial assault. The enemy's willingness to commit significant resources to this operation suggested objectives that went beyond simple destruction of Falcon Ridge's aircraft, possibly including plans for follow-on operations that would exploit any success achieved during the initial attack. This strategic perspective could influence tactical decisions about resource allocation and defensive priorities. The technical analysis she had conducted of enemy aircraft performance capabilities revealed specific vulnerabilities that could be exploited by defending pilots who understood how to take advantage of limitations in enemy systems. Her knowledge of enemy aircraft specifications included details about engine performance, maneuverability characteristics, and systems reliability that could inform tactical decisions about engagement ranges and attack approaches. This technical intelligence could provide crucial advantages during actual combat, where detailed knowledge of opponent capabilities often determined survival. Her insight into the coordination challenges that enemy formations would face during a complex multi-axis attack revealed potential opportunities for defensive forces to disrupt enemy plans through well-timed interventions at critical points in their attack sequence. The enemy's sophisticated plan required precise timing and coordination that could be vulnerable to disruption if defending forces could identify and exploit key coordination nodes. This understanding of enemy coordination requirements could enable defensive tactics that maximize the effectiveness of limited American forces against numerically superior opponents. The communications intercepts that Sarah had been monitoring revealed subtle changes in enemy radio discipline and transmission patterns that suggested final preparation phases for immediate attack, confirming that the window for defensive preparation was rapidly closing. Her linguistic capabilities enabled her to understand nuances in enemy communications that official translation services might miss, providing insights into enemy confidence levels and potential concerns about the mission. This communications intelligence could provide advance warning of specific enemy intentions and tactical approaches. Part 9. The Moral Choice. The weight of institutional expectations pressed against Sarah's growing conviction that she possessed both the capability and responsibility to contribute to the base's defense, creating an internal conflict between military discipline and moral imperative that demanded immediate resolution. Her training had emphasized obedience to orders and respect for command authority, principles that served crucial functions in maintaining military effectiveness and preventing chaos during complex operations. However, these same principles could become obstacles when rigid adherence to procedure conflicted with obvious operational necessity and the potential to save lives through individual initiative. The ethical framework that guided military decision-making included provisions for individual judgment in extreme circumstances, but these exceptions to normal command authority remained poorly defined and subject to severe consequences if misapplied. Sarah understood that taking unauthorized action could result in court-martial and termination of her military career, regardless of the outcome of her intervention. The personal consequences of defying direct orders included not only professional destruction but also potential criminal prosecution under military law that made unauthorized use of military equipment a serious felony. Her assessment of the tactical situation revealed mathematical certainties that made the moral choice increasingly clear despite the personal risks involved in unauthorized action. Thunder Flight's 8 F-35s faced enemy formations that included at least 24 hostile aircraft, creating engagement odds that challenged even optimistic assessments of American technological and training advantages. Lightning Strike represented a 20% increase in defensive capability that could make the difference between successful defense and catastrophic failure, but only if deployed immediately while tactical options remained available. The responsibility she felt toward her fellow service members extended beyond abstract loyalty to include specific individuals whose lives could depend on every available aircraft participating in the defensive effort. Captain Thompson, Lieutenant Morrison, and the other Thunder Flight pilots were preparing to face overwhelming odds with courage and professionalism, but their survival chances would improve significantly with additional support from properly equipped and competently flown aircraft. Her personal relationships with these individuals created moral obligations that transcended bureaucratic restrictions on aircraft deployment. The broader implications of base defense included responsibility for civilian populations in Pine Valley and other nearby communities that depended on Falcon ridge for protection against enemy air attacks. The failure of the base's defensive efforts would likely result in civilian casualties, as enemy aircraft sought targets of opportunity after completing their primary missions against military installations. This civilian dimension of the moral calculus added urgency to her decision-making process, while highlighting consequences that extended far beyond military considerations. Her understanding of military ethics included study of historical precedents where individual initiative and deviation from standard procedures had prevented greater tragedies or achieved crucial military objectives. The principle of mission accomplishment sometimes required subordinates to exceed their authority when commanders lacked complete information or when circumstances developed too rapidly for normal decision-making processes. These precedents provided ethical justification for individual action in extreme circumstances, but they also demonstrated the personal risks faced by military personnel who chose conscience over compliance. The technical readiness of lightning strike eliminated any legitimate safety concerns that might justify keeping the aircraft grounded during the emergency, as all systems had been thoroughly checked and certified for immediate deployment. The aircraft carried full fuel loads and appropriate air-to-air ordnance for the defensive mission, while her own qualifications exceeded those of some pilots who had been authorized for combat deployment. The absence of safety-related justifications for continued exclusion strengthened the moral case for immediate deployment while highlighting the arbitrary nature of age-based restrictions. Her analysis of command decision-making revealed institutional blind spots that prevented optimal utilization of available resources during crisis situations, suggesting that individual initiative might be necessary to achieve mission success. When formal procedures proved inadequate, Colonel Rivera's adherence to established protocols reflected legitimate concerns about command authority and regulatory compliance, but these same concerns could prevent adaptive responses to unusual circumstances that required flexibility in normal procedures. The tension between institutional stability and operational effectiveness created situations where individual judgment might prove superior to organizational policy. The time constraints imposed by rapidly approaching enemy formations eliminated any possibility of obtaining authorization through normal channels, making immediate action the only viable option for contributing to the defensive effort. Military bureaucracy required extensive documentation and approval processes that could take hours or days to complete, while enemy aircraft would reach engagement range within minutes. This temporal mismatch between institutional procedures and operational requirements created circumstances where unauthorized action became the only means of achieving legitimate military objectives. Her assessment of personal honor and professional integrity included recognition that failing to act when she possessed the capability to make a meaningful contribution would represent a form of moral cowardice that violated the fundamental principles of military service. The oath she had taken upon commissioning included commitments to defend against all enemies and to place mission accomplishment above personal considerations, creating moral obligations that transcended specific orders or regulatory restrictions. These foundational principles of military service provided ethical justification for individual action when institutional constraints prevented fulfillment of basic military duties. The precedent that her decision would establish for future situations created additional considerations about the broader implications of individual initiative in military organizations, but the immediate threat to base survival made abstract concerns about military discipline secondary to practical requirements for mission success. Future commanders would need to address the tension between institutional control and operational effectiveness, but current circumstances demanded immediate action regardless of long-term institutional implications. The survival of Thunder flight and the base took precedence over theoretical concerns about command authority and regulatory compliance. Her evaluation of alternative courses of action revealed no Viable options that could contribute to mission success while maintaining complete compliance with established procedures, making unauthorized deployment the only means of utilizing her capabilities in defense of the base. Requesting permission through normal channels would consume time that wasn't available, while likely resulting in denial based on existing policies rather than current operational requirements. The absence of legitimate alternatives strengthened the moral case for individual action, while highlighting the inadequacy of existing procedures for addressing extreme circumstances. The personal courage required for defying direct orders and risking career destruction represented the same qualities that military service was designed to develop and reward, creating a paradox where institutional expectations conflicted with the character traits that military training was intended to foster. Her willingness to accept personal consequences for the greater good reflected the selfless service and moral courage that military culture claimed to value. But these same qualities could bring her into conflict with institutional authority when circumstances required individual initiative. This paradox highlighted fundamental tensions within military organizations between conformity and leadership, obedience and initiative. The historical examples of military personnel who had achieved legendary status through unauthorized actions that saved lives and accomplished critical missions provided both inspiration and justification for her decision to act independently when institutional constraints prevented optimal response to operational requirements. These precedents demonstrated that military history honored individuals who placed mission accomplishment and protection of lives above personal career considerations, even when their actions violated established procedures or contradicted direct orders. The examples of legendary military heroes who had faced similar moral choices provided ethical guidance for her current decision-making process. Her final assessment of the moral calculus included recognition that regret for action taken in good faith would be easier to bear than regret for failing to act when she possessed the capability to make a meaningful difference in the outcome of a critical battle. The personal consequences of unauthorized action were significant but finite, while the consequences of inaction could include the destruction of the base and the deaths of colleagues whose survival might depend on every available aircraft participating in the defensive effort. This comparison of potential regrets clarified the moral choice while highlighting the fundamental responsibilities that transcended institutional restrictions. Sarah's hands moved with mechanical precision through lightning strikes pre-flight sequence, her muscle memory executing procedures she had performed countless times while her mind focused on the tactical challenges that lay ahead. The F-22 systems responded flawlessly to her commands, engines spooling up with the distinctive whine of advanced turbofans designed for supersonic combat operations. She had crossed the line from preparation to action and the familiar comfort of aircraft controls beneath her fingers provided stability in a moment that would define both her career and her character. The unauthorized engine start drew immediate attention from the maintenance crews working nearby, their surprised expressions quickly shifting to understanding as they recognized the significance of what they were witnessing. Sergeant O'Connor appeared at the edge of the hangar, his weathered face showing a mixture of concern and admiration as he watched Sarah complete the startup procedures with professional competence. He made no move to intervene or alert security, instead stepping back into the shadows where his presence wouldn't complicate her departure from the hangar. Her communications headset crackled with increasingly urgent transmissions from the control tower as radar operators detected lightning strikes activation and attempted to establish contact with an aircraft that wasn't scheduled for deployment. Sarah monitored these transmissions without responding, knowing that any acknowledgement would create official records of her unauthorized actions, while potentially triggering immediate orders to shut down and return to the hangar. Her silence preserved operational security while maintaining the element of surprise that could prove crucial during the coming engagement. The tactical display in her cockpit showed the approaching enemy formations as red symbols moving steadily toward engagement range, their coordinated movements confirming her analysis of their sophisticated planning and preparation. Thunder Flight's defensive deployment was proceeding according to established protocols, but their 8 aircraft remained significantly outnumbered by an enemy force that had clearly planned this operation to overwhelm American defensive capabilities through numerical superiority. Her addition to the defensive effort would improve the odds, but success would still require exceptional performance and tactical innovation. Rolling lightning strike toward the runway required careful navigation through maintenance areas and aircraft, parking spots that weren't designed for unauthorized departures, forcing Sarah to demonstrate the precise aircraft handling skills she had developed through countless hours of training. The F-22's advanced flight control systems responded smoothly to her inputs, but the narrow margins for error in ground operations demanded constant attention to clearances and obstacles that could damage the aircraft before it ever reached combat. Her careful maneuvering drew admiring glances from ground crews who appreciated skilled aircraft handling regardless of the circumstances surrounding it. The control tower's increasingly frantic attempts to establish communication included direct orders to halt all movement and return to the hangar, commands that carried the full weight of military authority and the potential for severe consequences if ignored. Sarah understood the legal implications of her actions while remaining convinced that immediate deployment represented the only viable option for contributing to the base's defense. Her decision to proceed despite direct orders reflected a calculated assessment that mission success justified the personal risks associated with insubordination and unauthorized equipment use. Her final systems checks confirmed that Lightning Strike was fully prepared for combat operations, with all weapons systems functional and electronic countermeasures ready for immediate deployment against enemy radar and missile systems. The aircraft carried a full load of IM-12 OMRAM missiles optimized for beyond visual range engagements, along with AIM-9 Sidewinders for close-range combat situations that might develop during complex multi-aircraft engagements. This weapons configuration provided maximum flexibility for various tactical scenarios, while ensuring she could contribute effectively to any phase of the defensive battle. The psychological transition from training to combat created unique mental challenges as Sarah prepared to face actual enemies, who were determined to kill her while she attempted to destroy their aircraft and eliminate them as threats. Her extensive simulation experience had prepared her for the technical aspects of air combat, but the emotional reality of taking human life in defense of her country represented a threshold that could only be crossed through actual experience. The weight of this responsibility added gravity to her decision, while strengthening her resolve to perform effectively when lives depended on her capabilities. Lightning Strike's movement toward the runway triggered automatic security protocols that alerted base personnel to unauthorized aircraft activity, creating additional pressure for rapid departure before security forces could intervene to prevent her takeoff. The military police had procedures for stopping unauthorized aircraft operations, but these procedures were designed for ground-based interventions that became impossible once aircraft achieved flight status. Her window for departure was closing rapidly as security personnel moved to respond to the unauthorized activity detected by automated monitoring systems. The runway threshold approach required precise navigation and timing to achieve takeoff without clearance while avoiding potential conflicts with other aircraft operations that might be proceeding according to normal schedules. Sarah's knowledge of base traffic patterns and standard operating procedures enabled her to identify the optimal window for departure while minimizing risks to other aircraft and personnel. Her unauthorized takeoff would violate numerous safety protocols, but her careful attention to timing and positioning demonstrated respect for aviation safety even while defying command authority. The moment of commitment arrived as Sarah aligned Lightning Strike with the runway centerline and advanced the throttles to takeoff power, feeling the tremendous acceleration that only a modern fighter aircraft could provide. The F-22's twin engines produced over 70,000 pounds of thrust, pressing her back into her ejection seat as the aircraft gathered speed for departure. There would be no turning back from this point, as her unauthorized takeoff would create permanent consequences. Regardless of the outcome of the coming battle, radio transmissions from the control tower shifted from attempts at communication to direct orders for immediate landing and return to the hangar, commands that carried increasing urgency as Sarah approached rotation speed and the point where intervention would become impossible. The tower controllers understood the implications of her actions while recognizing their inability to prevent an unauthorized departure once the aircraft achieved flight status. Their final transmissions included warnings about legal consequences and potential court-martial proceedings that would follow her return to base. The sensation of leaving the ground in lightning strike provided a familiar rush of adrenaline, mixed with the sobering recognition that she was now committed to a course of action that would define the remainder of her military career. The F-22's smooth acceleration and responsive handling reminded her of the countless training flights that had prepared her for this moment, but the stakes were now infinitely higher than any simulation or training exercise. Her unauthorized deployment represented a bet that her capabilities could make a meaningful difference in the outcome of a battle that would determine the survival of her colleagues and the base itself. Her departure from Falcon Ridge Air Force Base carried symbolic weight that extended beyond immediate tactical considerations to include broader questions about individual responsibility and institutional authority in extreme circumstances. The sight of lightning strike climbing away from the base without authorization would be remembered by everyone who witnessed it, creating a legend that would influence future discussions about military leadership and the balance between obedience and initiative. Her actions had already achieved historical significance, regardless of their tactical outcome. The immediate tactical priority involved achieving optimal positioning for engagement with enemy formations while avoiding detection until she could contribute most effectively to the defensive effort. Sarah's understanding of enemy capabilities and probable tactics informed her approach route selection, choosing flight paths that utilized terrain masking and electronic signature management to delay discovery of her participation in the battle. Her element of surprise could provide crucial advantages during the initial engagement phase, but only if she could remain undetected until the optimal moment for intervention. The communications channels used by Thunder Flight carried urgent tactical updates as their pilots prepared for engagement with enemy formations that continued their approach toward the base. Sarah monitored these transmissions while maintaining radio silence to preserve her covert status, gaining situational awareness about friendly force dispositions and enemy contact development. The professional competence evident in Thunder Flight's communications provided reassurance about their capabilities, while highlighting the coordination challenges that would complicate the coming engagement. Part 11. The challenge. The first visual contact with enemy aircraft came as Sarah climbed lightning strike through 15,000 feet, spotting sunlight glinting off distant canopies as hostile formations maintained their coordinated approach toward Falcon Ridge, the site of actual enemy fighters. Transformed abstract tactical planning into visceral reality as she recognized the sleek profiles of advanced aircraft flown by skilled pilots who intended to destroy everything she had sworn to protect. Her heart rate increased despite her mental preparation, but her hands remained steady on the controls as adrenaline sharpened her focus and heightened her sensory awareness. Thunder Flight's engagement with the lead enemy formation began as Sarah positioned herself to intervene at the optimal moment, watching missile trails streak across the desert sky as American and enemy pilots committed to deadly combat that would determine air superiority over the contested region. The visual spectacle of modern air combat included brilliant flashes of rocket motors and the geometric precision of contrails, marking flight paths as opposing fighters maneuvered for tactical advantage. Each missile launch represented life or death. Decisions made in milliseconds by pilots operating at the limits of human performance and aircraft capability. Her tactical analysis of the developing engagement revealed opportunities for intervention that could exploit enemy focus on Thunder flight while potentially disrupting their coordinated attack plan through unexpected pressure from an additional axis. The enemy formations had structured their assault to overwhelm 8 defending aircraft, but the sudden appearance of a 9th fighter from an unexpected direction could create confusion and force tactical adjustments that might provide Thunder flight with crucial advantages. Sarah's positioning enabled her to threaten enemy aircraft that had committed to engagements with other American pilots, creating multiple simultaneous threats that would complicate enemy decision-making. The first enemy aircraft she targeted was a sleek fighter that had positioned itself for a missile shot against Captain Thompson's F-35. Its pilot focused on achieving a firing solution against Thunder flight's formation leader. Sarah's approach from below and behind placed her in an ideal position for an undetected attack, but the shot required precise timing to avoid hitting Thompson's aircraft while ensuring destruction of the enemy fighter. Her finger found the missile. Release trigger as targeting systems confirmed lock-on and optimal firing parameters, the moment of truth arriving with mechanical precision. The AM-12 Ram missile departed lightning, strikes weapons bay with a burst of rocket flame, and immediately began its autonomous flight toward the target, guided by sophisticated sensors that tracked the enemy aircraft's heat signature and radar reflection. Sarah watched the missile's progress on her tactical display, while simultaneously scanning for additional threats that might require immediate attention. The enemy pilot remained unaware of the incoming missile until his aircraft's warning systems detected the approaching threat, but his evasive maneuvers came too late to avoid the precision-guided warhead that detonated with devastating effect. The destruction of her first enemy aircraft created visible confusion among nearby hostile fighters as they attempted to identify the source of unexpected attack while maintaining their own engagement priorities against Thunder flight's defenders. Sarah's element of surprise had achieved maximum effect, but her presence was now known to enemy forces, who would adapt their tactics to address the additional threat she represented. The dynamic nature of air combat demanded constant adaptation. As circumstances changed with each missile fired and each aircraft destroyed or damaged. Her second engagement opportunity developed as an enemy fighter attempted to disengage from combat with Lieutenant Morrison, its pilot recognizing the deteriorating tactical situation and seeking to escape before suffering the same fate as his wingman. Sarah's superior position enabled her to intercept the fleeing aircraft with a perfectly timed missile shot that caught the enemy pilot during his escape attempt. The successful engagement demonstrated her ability to exploit tactical opportunities created by enemy mistakes while maintaining awareness of the broader engagement dynamics that determined overall battle outcomes. The enemy formation's response to her intervention included coordinated attempts to isolate and destroy lightning strike through concentrated attacks that tested her defensive capabilities and aircraft handling skills. Multiple enemy fighters converged on her position with clear intent to eliminate the unexpected threat she represented, forcing her into defensive maneuvering that utilized her aircraft's superior performance characteristics while avoiding enemy missile shots. The F-22's advanced capabilities provided advantages in speed and maneuverability, but survival required constant vigilance and precise execution of defensive tactics against determined opponents. Her third confirmed kill resulted from a close-range engagement that developed when an enemy fighter attempted to engage her with cannon fire. The hostile pilot, clearly confident in his aircraft's capabilities and his own skill in visual range combat, Sarah's superior training and lightning strike's advanced flight control systems enabled her to outmaneuver the enemy aircraft through a series of high-G turns that placed her behind the hostile fighter in perfect position for a decisive shot. The IM-9 Sidewinder missile's infrared guidance system locked onto the enemy aircraft's heat signature and delivered a warhead that ensured immediate destruction. The intensity of multi-aircraft combat created sensory overload conditions that challenged her ability to maintain situational awareness while executing precise tactical maneuvers under extreme time pressure. Enemy aircraft appeared and disappeared from her field of view as complex, three-dimensional maneuvering created constantly changing geometric relationships between friend and foe. Her training in spatial awareness and threat prioritization enabled her to maintain focus on immediate threats while tracking the broader tactical situation that determined survival in environments where split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death. Thunder Flight's success in the engagement depended increasingly on coordination and mutual support as individual aircraft engaged multiple enemies while attempting to maintain formation integrity and communication. Sarah's integration into their defensive effort required careful attention to friendly aircraft positions, while avoiding interference with established tactical plans that the squadron had rehearsed extensively. Her contributions had to enhance, rather than complicate Thunder Flight's effectiveness, requiring constant adaptation to evolving tactical situations that demanded both individual excellence and team coordination. The fourth enemy aircraft fell to her guns during a high-speed chase that tested Lightning Strike's performance envelope as both aircraft pushed their systems to maximum capability in attempts to gain tactical advantage. The pursuit developed through a series of climbing turns and diving attacks that carried both fighters across vast expanses of desert terrain while they maneuvered for decisive positioning. Sarah's superior knowledge of local geography enabled her to utilize terrain features that aided her pursuit while complicating the enemy pilot's escape attempts. Enemy attempts to coordinate attacks against her required sophisticated tactical adjustments as hostile pilots learned to respect her capabilities while seeking opportunities to engage her with superior numbers. The enemy formation's initial casualness had given way to professional recognition that they faced a skilled opponent flying advanced equipment, forcing them to allocate resources specifically for dealing with her threat, rather than focusing entirely on Thunder Flight's defensive efforts. This shift in enemy priorities reduced pressure on other American aircraft while validating her decision to join the engagement despite official restrictions. Her fifth confirmed destruction occurred during a complex engagement involving multiple aircraft from both sides. The chaotic nature of large-scale air combat creating opportunities for skilled pilots to exploit enemy mistakes while avoiding friendly fire incidents. The successful missile shot required precise identification of enemy aircraft amid the confusion of swirling combat, with Sarah's extensive training in aircraft recognition enabling her to distinguish between friend and foe under challenging visual conditions. The enemy pilot's destruction demonstrated her ability to maintain effectiveness even during the most demanding phases of air combat operations. The sixth enemy aircraft succumbed to her weapons during an engagement that showcased Lightning Strike's advanced sensors and weapon systems, with beyond visual range detection capabilities enabling her to engage targets that remained invisible to less sophisticated aircraft. The AMRIA missile's autonomous guidance system performed flawlessly despite electronic countermeasures employed by the enemy aircraft, demonstrating the technological superiority that provided American forces with crucial advantages when properly utilized by skilled pilots. Her successful employment of advanced weapon systems validated the extensive training she had received in their operation. Her seventh kill developed during a defensive engagement when enemy fighters attempted to trap her against mountainous terrain that limited her maneuvering options while exposing her to coordinated attacks from multiple directions. Sarah's escape From the tactical trap required innovative use of lightning strikes performance, characteristics combined with precise knowledge of local terrain features that enabled her to exploit narrow passages that enemy aircraft couldn't safely navigate. The resulting engagement showcased both her piloting skills and her intimate knowledge of the local operational environment. The 8th enemy aircraft destruction occurred during a head-on engagement that tested her nerve and precision under the most demanding combat conditions, with both aircraft approaching each other at combined speeds exceeding 1,500 miles per hour. The successful missile shot required perfect timing and unwavering commitment as the distance between aircraft closed at rates that left no margin for error or hesitation. Her victory in this classic test of pilot courage and skill demonstrated the mental toughness that distinguished exceptional combat pilots from merely competent ones. Enemy formation discipline began deteriorating as aircraft losses mounted and surviving pilots recognized the futility of continuing their assault against defenders who had proven more capable than intelligence assessments had predicted. Sarah's contribution to this psychological victory extended beyond her individual aircraft destructions to include the broader impact of her presence on enemy morale and tactical confidence. The sight of their carefully planned operation failing against determined resistance had shaken enemy resolve while strengthening American defensive efforts. Her 9th confirmed kill resulted from pursuit of an enemy fighter that attempted to escape the engagement area after recognizing the failure of their mission, the fleeing pilot seeking to preserve his aircraft and his life rather than continuing a battle that had turned decisively against his formation. Sarah's pursuit demonstrated both her tactical awareness and her commitment to preventing enemy escape that might enable future attacks against American forces. The successful interception ensured that this particular enemy pilot would never threaten American lives again. The 10th enemy aircraft fell during the final phase of the engagement as surviving hostile fighters attempted to withdraw from combat while maintaining enough organization to avoid complete destruction during their retreat. Sarah's positioning enabled her to intercept enemy aircraft during their most vulnerable phase when their focus shifted from attack to escape and their formation discipline relaxed in response to heavy losses. Her successful attack during this critical moment maximized the damage inflicted on enemy forces while minimizing their ability to regroup for future operations. Her 11th victory occurred during pursuit of an enemy formation leader whose destruction would complete the demoralization of surviving hostile pilots while ensuring that experienced enemy commanders wouldn't survive to plan future attacks. The engagement required careful stalking through mountainous terrain as the enemy pilot attempted to use natural obstacles to break contact and escape destruction. Sarah's persistence and superior aircraft performance enabled her to maintain contact despite the enemy's evasive maneuvering, resulting in a missile shot that eliminated a significant threat to future American operations. The 12th and final enemy aircraft destruction completed Sarah's remarkable combat debut as the last surviving hostile fighter attempted one final attack against Thunder Flight before acknowledging the complete failure of their mission. The enemy pilot's courage in pressing his attack despite overwhelming odds earned Sarah's professional respect even as she prepared to destroy his aircraft and end his life. Her final missile shot of the engagement demonstrated both her tactical competence and her understanding of the grim realities that characterized modern air combat. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.